Hello, everybody. My name is Adrian Goins. I'm the Director of Community and Evangelism here at Rancher Labs, and I want to welcome you to today's session of Office Hours. We are here to answer your questions about Rancher's solutions. So come join us in the Office Hours channel on the Rancher users Slack. If you don't already have an invitation for that, you can get one for free if you just go to slack.rancher.io, which is actually like crawling across the screen there in the bottom. So just go to that link and get yourself an invitation and come hang out and chat with us. I am joined today by an esteemed panel of one technical expert. we try to get more people in here, but everybody has other things booked. But fortunately, Chris was able to join us. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, so my name is Chris Owen. I've been at Rancher for quite a long time. I'm the VP of Field Engineering. So what does that mean? That means that anytime anyone wants to sort of have a technical discussion with us, is looking at getting a support contract, needs help in the community as well, one of my field engineers is typically the person who's on the other end of a Slack message or on the other end of a demo call. So looking forward to seeing what happens in the office hours. So this is my first one.
I'm looking forward to seeing what happens here as well. All right, I see people are starting to roll into the live stream. That's good. So I have a little bit of housekeeping stuff to do because this is a public event. And since it's a public event, well, it wouldn't be complete if we didn't have some ground rules. So basically, this is a safe place that exists to help members of the community grow from the experience of others. Everyone is welcome here. We expect everyone to treat each other with respect and dignity. And there are no stupid questions. The only thing that we ask is that you limit your questions to topics around how to use Rancher, Kubernetes, and other CNCF tooling. We will do our best to answer every question, but we don't have access to your specific environment. And that means that we might not be able to do specific debugging of local issues, but we'll do our best to get you to whatever the next step is in troubleshooting. Chris and I will just jump in and answer questions and probably talk on top of one another, and that's fine. He and I have a range of experience, but we also don't know everything. So there might be things where we say, you know, we don't have an answer for that. Audience, though, if you are in the chat and somebody's asking a question, you can help us out by posting URLs for official documentation, blogs, tweets, or anything that you think might be relevant to the conversation. We take live questions and prepared questions. So between sessions, you can post your questions on the Rancher forums or on Stack Overflow tagged with Rancher, K3S, RKE, or Longhorn. You can also help us out by following Rancher Labs on Twitter and retweeting the announcements for upcoming sessions, because the more people that we have here, well, the better it'll be for everyone. If you would like to be one of our panelists in a future session, this is not just limited to people who work for Rancher. If you are an experienced user of Rancher, experienced user of Kubernetes, and you'd like to join and help people out, just send me a message on the Rancher user Slack. I'm Adrian, and we'll get you on board. If you're new to Kubernetes or Rancher, coffee. If you're new to Kubernetes or Rancher, we have a weekly Intro to Kubernetes and Rancher training that will get you up and running. And then for comprehensive training on Rancher and using it to deploy and manage Kubernetes clusters, we also have the Rancher Academy at academy.rancher.com. The last 2 times that I've done this office hours, I actually ran this session on top of the Kubernetes office hours, which happens next week. So this week, I specifically didn't do that. And instead, I ran it on the day that the Rancher meetup is happening. So that's happening a little bit later on today. And you can sign up for that on rancher.com. And we'll talk a little bit more about what you can expect in that meetup later on in the show. But since this is here for all of you, let's jump over to Slack and see what we've got. Whoa, hey, let's jump over to... That's the wrong Slack window. Just a moment. That's me talking to somebody else to see if he would be able to join us this morning, and he is occupied. There we go. There's the right Slack window. I see we got some people joining. Thank you, everybody. And we see we got some people typing, but there's no questions yet. So while we wait for people to set up... Yeah.
Adrian, one of the things that I would also recommend as a resource is the rodeos, because obviously they're free, they're training, they're interactive, and they give
Oh,
a really good overview of Rancher and sort of a nice environment that you can break and get that experience without interrupting your daily working life. So you can find all of those on the Rancher/events on the website, and we've got some upcoming ones. We've also introduced a new one that is aimed more at developers, so it takes you through sort of creation of containers, a little bit about security and layers and all the rest of it. So it's not just focused around Rancher, it's more around sort of the creation of the containers and catalog items and Helm artifacts and stuff. So we've got those. I think we've got one in the US later this month, and the first one in Europe is in September.
that's cool. Okay. Now, rodeos used to be, well, I guess, are they still region specific, or now that they're virtual, are they open to anyone and anywhere?
No, so they're pretty much open to anyone and everywhere. We do across Europe hold some language specific ones because obviously some people want to learn in their native language.
Right.
But for the most part, they're done in English. They're done in sort of a reasonable time zone across Europe. And then what we've been doing more in the US is having an East Coast time and a West Coast time rodeo.
Okay.
So rather than being, oh, this is going to be New York, this is going to be wherever, Minneapolis, whatever. Yeah, they're just more encompassing now. So we've dropped them. I think we do a few a month, couple a month typically of each, and yeah, they're just fun to come along and get sort of interaction with the guys. We open up a Zoom session partway through, sort of like this, where people can come in, interact, ask questions about how the rodeo's going, and also ask generic questions as well. And then we open it up again at the end. So we've had really good feedback. It's just a fun way of learning about Rancher.
Excellent. We have our first question in the chat where John is asking if there's a way to upgrade a standalone Rancher launched Kubernetes cluster. I'm guessing this is. Oh, he adds more info where he says it does not seem to be an option for standalone, but I'm having trouble determining for sure whether that option is grayed out intentionally due to my cluster being launched from a standalone Rancher instance. It's interesting. Is there a way to upgrade a standalone Rancher launched Kubernetes cluster? If it's Rancher launched, it's not standalone.
So it depends. So K3S, it will do. It depends how the cluster has been created. So if it's been created with RKE, you can't upgrade it from within the Rancher console. You would have to use RKE to do the upgrade. If it was K3S and you're on 2.4, then you can upgrade the Kubernetes cluster. So I'm assuming that this one isn't. So I'm guessing it's been stood up or instantiated in some way outside of Rancher and imported, and you can't currently upgrade imported clusters.
Okay. So John, give us some clarification on that. If it was imported, if you launched it outside, or if you launched it with Rancher, and tell us the version number. And of course, you see that I'm typing this in the chat, so repetition there. Amit is asking if there's any news about Rancher 2.5. And oh, I see he found the roadmap, the project plan.
Okay. I'm not sure how far we want to go into discussing 2.5. There's a few things I can probably mention. So
Oops. I think Chris froze.
I don't want to steal.
Oh, there you go.
Oh no. Am I still
no,
back?
you're back.
Oh, back.
You're back. All right.
Fantastic. So not wanting to steal Bill's thunder, there are some differences in the way that we manage EKS clusters, which is quite cool. So the meetup tonight is pretty much all about that. So tune into that and get a bit more information. Mm-hmm. We've enhanced the dashboard. So the dashboard that was in the Try Dashboard tab in 2.4 has been enhanced and is even more funky than it was before. And we've got sort of a few new features that are being added to that dashboard, and we're trying to make it so that Rancher is more usable in standalone clusters. So it's not the primary objective of Rancher, but we know that people are using Rancher in a standalone cluster and want to be able to deploy catalog items, deploy monitoring with one click, and all the other stuff. So that stuff's all coming in 2.5 as well. So stay tuned. We're still tweaking the exact feature set that we're going to put in there and how we're going to market it and stuff, but it's definitely coming along nicely.
Yep. Nunix is asking, and I have an answer for this. He's asking if there's a local training path with different K3D and RKE or K3S and RKE and how to go from one to the other. So I built the Rancher Academy, and right now that gives you all the information that you need about deploying Rancher into RKE and then using it to stand up and manage Kubernetes clusters. There are updates coming for Rancher 2.4 content, and I have a list of things that I would like to build they'll be like elective courses that'll give you an intro into using K3S, using K3D, and a deeper dive into doing stuff with RKE. And while those are in the roadmap, there's no development that's happened in them yet. So for the moment, there is no local training path. But Chris, in the rodeos, how much do you cover? Do you cover K3S or RKE? And is there a hands-on component for that, or is it just the Rancher stuff?
Yeah, so we do cover RKE. So sort of the flow of the standard rodeo is we use RKE to create a cluster. We then do a Helm install of Rancher on top of that cluster. And we then import a child cluster and sort of play with the monitoring and all the rest of it. For the K3S stuff, so the other thing to refer to there is the quick starts as well. So if you go to the Rancher docs quick starts, we've got a bunch of different Terraform scripts and scripts that will allow you to run Rancher easily in sort of Vagrant or on sort of your chosen cloud provider, AWS, DigitalOcean, Azure. There's quick starts for all of those, where all you need to do is basically supply some credentials and we'll spin up the whole thing for you. Now, those are all based currently on RKE, but they are moving to K3S at some point in the shorter term. So you're going to have the option as well to have RKE and K3S. I know one of the questions that we're quite regularly asked is, why would I choose K3S or RKE to run the Rancher server on? So there isn't really a huge amount of difference between the two, but K3S does give those extra options of externalizing the database off to, say, RDS in Amazon, so you don't have to have that etcd core in there. But I would definitely go and have a look at the quick starts, or come along to a rodeo, and we do go into some of the sort of the RKE config. We talk about the config file, how to specify how many nodes you want to spin up, and some of the optional parameters in there. But the actual online documentation that Adrian's showing now is actually pretty comprehensive when it comes to running RK and the options that you get.
I think our documentation is amazing. I always refer to the docs when I'm doing the weekly intro to Kubernetes and Rancher course as being the first place that you should go, because unlike a lot of things where there's like just a really sparse README, we have a lot of really detailed information on how to get up and running and get these things out in your environment so that you can start using them. Nunix says he's looking for a future rodeo. Well, rodeos they can register for rodeos off of...
If you go to ranch.com/events. Yeah, and if you scroll down, you should be able to find a rodeo. Oh, there you go, the rodeos.
Yep.
Yeah, so these are the ones. So if you look there, we've got one in Germany. If you're in the European time zone, which I'm assuming most of the people on this call probably are. Then we've then got one in English. And then I think if you scroll down a little bit further, I think it's the 25th, we've got the developer one. It might not be on there yet. No. So there is one on the 25th. I'm going to make sure that that's showing on there shortly. So as I mentioned earlier, the developer rodeos, less about Rancher and more about Kubernetes and Helm and creation of containers. So it's sort of aimed more at the developers who are looking at creating the applications that are going to run on top of Kubernetes than looking at the managing of the Kubernetes itself.
Nice. That's at rancher.com/events if you want to find a rodeo and sign up for that. And as long as I'm here, we have live training options. We've got the intro training. We've got online meetups like we're having later on today. And then the Kubernetes master classes, which are deep dives into Kubernetes concepts and secondary software that either cloud native tooling or open source or vendor stuff to help fortify and extend your Kubernetes experience into other places. A lot of those deal with security and the day two operations, where it's like now you have a Kubernetes cluster. What do you do with it?
Yeah.
Today's rodeo, Rancher 2.5 EKS Lifecycle Management Preview. That's a tasty mouthful, right? We got to work on our titling here. So yeah, you can register for this. So you can register for this, get an early look at EKS lifecycle management features that are coming in 2.5. That's later today at 1 p.m. Eastern time, and then we'll have another office hour session directly after that, where you can come in and talk to me and some other people who are joining, and we might be able to answer some questions that you have about that in addition to other stuff.
And for those meetups as well, even if you can't make the meetup, it's worth registering for it, because then you'll get emailed the link to as a reminder of the YouTube video that we'll put up afterwards as well.
Yep. Yeah, Amit's asking if I can paste the meetup link in the Slack. That's a wonderful idea. There you go. Hey, Tej, thanks for joining. All right, so if you're watching, I see we've got 15 people watching on the stream right now, and we have very little activity in the chat, so please join the office hours chat on the Rancher user Slack and come and ask us questions. For any of you who are watching who are Academy users, this is your time to come in and ask about the stuff that you're learning or any questions that you have about implementation of the concepts. We're here for you. But since we don't have any questions right now, I will toss out some questions that we have from the prepared side once I find where my browser window went. There it is. We had somebody ask how to check HPA logs on K3S. It's actually quite simple. If you do kubectl get HPA and the deployment name, you'll be able to get the logs from that. HPA, if you don't know, that's the horizontal pod autoscaler.
It's fun to play with. I do like the demo that we do. I might try and get it introduced actually into the rodeos, because we don't cover some of the more in-depth stuff like HPA. But you remember the cow demo that you've done, where you have gradually more Rancher cows appearing on the screen? That's actually really cool on the HPA load. So I've done a Windows version of that as well, so you can run it on Windows, but it's still my favorite demo, I think, with your changing color cows. I especially like the pink ones.
I like the pink ones. The blue one is the wrong color blue, but I just wanted to keep it to the web colors. But
yellow is quite
great.
Contrasty.
Yeah, and pink is great too. I use that in the training too, where I'm like, the client called and said that the boss is allergic to the color yellow, because why else would you change it from yellow to pink? Let's see. Scrolling through. It's interesting. The prepared questions that we have are a little harder to answer because I can't like type out the command. So I'm scrolling through trying to find one that makes sense.
Yeah, we can talk about the difference between Upstream Docker and package Docker.
Oh, that's great. Let's do that.
Yeah. So do you want to start with what Upstream is, and then I'll talk about what package Docker is? Or do you want to do both? Or do you want me to do both?
No, I'll start. So the question that we had was, can someone briefly explain what's the difference between Upstream Docker and package Docker? And this was from an Academy user. And that's a totally reasonable question, because we talk in the Academy about how you want to make sure that you're running the Upstream Docker, and we have scripts that will install that. So Upstream Docker is Docker from Docker. It's unmodified, it's pure, it's going to be the same thing wherever you run it, compared to package Docker, which, Chris, you want to throw in on that?
Which is where, typically one of the operating system distros will repackage it into a package that they then wrap. So the install of Docker gets done. So it could be that it's wrapped as a snap. It could be that it's wrapped as an RPM. But they effectively wrap the package that is coming from Docker, which is their way of testing it and deploying it into their operating system, which makes it easier for them to manage, but it makes it much more difficult for us to patch. So I think where the distinction between upstream, and we typically always, when we're talking about Docker, we refer to upstream. Where we need to, or we have a capability with Upstream Docker, because it's open source, we can effectively create a patched version of Upstream Docker that will run in the same way on your operating system, hopefully with the bug fix that we patch. But if it's packaged as a packaged Docker from one of the OS vendors, then we obviously don't have access to that code, so we can't provide you a packaged version of Docker specifically for your operating system. So it's one of the things that we quite commonly get asked around the supports, like, what's the difference and why do you specify Upstream Docker? And that's why we specify Upstream Docker, because we have access to it.
Yep. And some of the package Dockers I've seen will make assumptions about what defaults should be and what's good for your environment. And we can't have here's how you install Rancher here and here and here and here and here. And they can change those things at any time. Whereas we know that Upstream Docker is going to be the same everywhere, and so we can guarantee the experience that you will have.
Absolutely. And there can also be a lag in packaged Docker as well in the version that's been released. So it may take them a while to repackage a new version of Docker and get it deployed. Whereas if there's a particular function that you're looking for in a new version of Docker, then you might want it sooner than that package is released for your operating system.
Right, right. Juan asks if we have training in Spanish. Hola, Juan. En este momento, no. Lo siento. I live in Chile. I speak basic Spanish. And oh wow, we just had a crazy drop in bandwidth. Go ahead.
Yeah, we do a Spanish version of the rodeo. Okay. So Raul does the Spanish version of the rodeo. We don't run them as frequently as we do the English ones. We probably only run one a quarter. But keep an eye on the events page and check out when it says there's a Spanish rodeo, it will be done in Spanish.
I didn't even think about the rodeos. I was thinking about academy training or the weekly training.
Hey, man, you shouldn't forget the rodeos. The rodeos are awesome.
Sorry. Yeah.
They're great fun.
All right, we had a momentary drop in bandwidth, but it looks like we're back up and good and streaming along, so we're good. I'm always concerned about my internet bandwidth over here in Chile, where we're probably lucky to have internet, especially where I live.
I'm always concerned about mine. I've got a ridiculous amount of bandwidth, but it never seems to help with a Zoom call. It just dies.
I have all of this quality of service stuff that I do on my firewall here in the house. I actually have 2 connections, and I set priority for QoS for streaming packets to go out first, and Zoom calls as well. But it's like the level of effort that I have to put in to maintain this is outside the scope of what normal people would be able to do, or what anybody should really have to do. Like, this stuff should just
absolutely
work.
Yeah, I think I'm probably going to have an offline chat with you about that, because there's definitely some black hole going on with my setup. So I think I need a new router. I think my router is actually the bottleneck for my broadband connection, because I think the broadband connection is faster than the processor can handle. So it's doing DPI, and I've turned all of that off, and it's just not powerful enough. So yeah, I may have a chat with you about what you're running.
Sure. Nunix asks what we've got going on for Kubecon next week. We are at Kubecon. Kubecon is virtual this year. This is Kubecon EU. So Rancher has a booth. We are a Diamond sponsor. We have some talks happening. So there's a talk on, I don't actually know where the schedule is offhand. We have a talk on K3S. We have a talk on Longhorn. And at the booth, we have a cool demo that Sheldon put together. Sheldon's one of the field engineers on running K3S on a Raspberry Pi cluster, and some like proof of concept stuff for interacting with real world devices from the Kubernetes cluster itself. Chris, have you seen his demo yet?
I've seen whose demo? Sheldon's.
Sheldon, yeah, his like cluster in a box in that suitcase that he has.
It scared me when his face popped up in the middle of that video. I nearly fell off my chair. It was like one of the things that I really just did not expect. I'm sitting there and it's like got a nice pretty picture of Rancher, and then all of a sudden Sheldon's face was like in your face. It's like, oh my God. So yeah, I was quite surprised when I saw that, but now it's great. I mean, we've taken the the case. We had it at a couple of conferences last year, and it always goes down well. It's a really interesting sort of solution, I guess, in a box. It's great for doing demos, but yeah, all of that stuff. He's got the whole sort of kit list and all of the commands and everything that are used to build that actually documented on a GitHub repo as well. So anyone who wants to replicate it can go out there and do it. And I mean, it's very cool.
It's super cool. The things that you can do with Kubernetes in real world edge type scenarios, like we all get that Kubernetes is going to the edge, but when you actually see somebody cross that boundary between like a Raspberry Pi or something that's very small but that has a hardware interface, and then you're able to interact with the real world with it, you start to imagine, this is like hopefully not as bad as what Skynet will become, but it's like we can influence the real world with software, and it's within the grasp of what any of us can do with hardware that's readily available. Like this stuff is just, it's ridiculous where we are in the world, and think where we were 20 years ago, and then just try to imagine where we're going to be in 20 years.
Yeah, I think if we look back to when K3S was announced sort of last March, I think even we were a little bit naive in sort of the use cases that people could come up with. And it's like the creativity that is out in the community and some of the demos that people are doing and some of the customers that we're talking to and the use cases that they're using, they're just mind blowing. It's just that it's being used in places you would never have thought of. But you think once it's been sort of, you've been enlightened to the facts that it's being used there, it's like, oh my God, why didn't I think of that? I should have thought of that. That just completely makes sense.
Yep.
So yeah, it's quite scary how prevalent Kubernetes is becoming, and it's just everywhere.
Amit just posted a link to the schedule in the chat, and I'm going to post a link to Rancher's demo video on the CNCF's YouTube channel, where I did a road to Kubecon adventure story. And in there are the times as well for it's how to find our booth, as well as the times for the 2 speaker events that we have going on. We also have a keynote that Basil put together on managing cluster sprawl and the types of scenarios and solutions that we all have to start thinking about as we start having more and more Kubernetes clusters in more and more places.
Yeah, and don't forget, we've got the interactive booth as well. So I'll be there Monday and Tuesday next week, and there's a bunch of field engineers and engineers who are going to be on hand to answer questions, anything about Rancher. You can schedule a full demo if you want to. But yeah, we'll be there answering questions.
Hey everyone, we're still here. Hangout. We are troubleshooting why latency on my connection just shot up to 130 milliseconds, and I think this is actually my provider. But hang out. I'll try to get this fixed. We'll be right back. Hi, I don't actually know for sure if we're back yet. I'm getting interesting reports from the YouTubes saying that the connection quality is poor, but I'm showing that I'm streaming out at high quality connections. So let me know in the chat if this is good or
I'm
bad.
still seeing the please stand by on my stream.
Oh, that would be bad then.
Oh, no,
Huh.
you've come back very slow. All right, so
Yeah,
yeah, it's just catching up.
it's really slow. That's a delay of about 30 seconds then.
Yep.
Um,
Okay, well, we can continue to talk. I'm sure it'll be fine.
yeah. I
We,
mean, okay, so
we,
so the worst case scenario for this is that if all right, Amit gives it a thumbs up. So worst case
okay.
scenario is this is also all being recorded locally. Is that correct? Am I also recording this locally? Yes, this is also all being recorded locally. So Chris and I are going to continue to talk. And if the live stream portion of it just doesn't work out, then I'll just rip this into an actual video and we'll post it afterwards and you'll have everything. So continue to post your questions in the chat and we will continue to talk and stuff.
Yeah, I just have to go back to one of the comments that was made by Nunix in the chat about WSL2. Now, I love WSL2. I think it is absolutely amazing. And yes, that is my edge as well. But for anyone who's, I know there's a lot of people out there who are big sort of Mac people. I've always been a Windows person. I've always struggled by and then run a Linux VM if I've needed to do anything in proper Linux. But the fact that WSL2 has been introduced into Windows, I think it's now the perfect development machine. I love it. I think it's great. So I'm sure there's lots of people, even within our organization, that will argue against me on that one. But I'm really impressed with what Windows has done.
I am impressed with what Windows has done as well. I think WSL2 is a giant leap in the right direction. Remembering Microsoft when they were so anti open source and anti Linux and anti everything. And now it's like they recognize that we don't have to fight with one another. You know, if
Yeah.
everything that helps everybody, what is it that Sheng said? A rising tide raises all ships. So let's just all try to do more and better things. We have a lot of people in the academy that are running RKE on WSL2 and doing things with it that just blow me away. Like I'm one of those Mac guys that Chris was talking about. So I'm in the camp of Windows, boo. Except I haven't honestly used a Windows machine in more than a decade. So it sounds like now Windows is Microsoft's
Even Darren,
reinvented.
if you follow Darren, I build the cloud on Twitter. Even he's bought himself a nice little Surface 2 sort of Surface Go 2 machine that he's been sort of talking about on Twitter and saying it's a fun little device and it's just good enough for him to be able to do stuff. The performance is never going to be great on something that size, but they are fun little toys. But I've got various Surfaces and I've been really impressed with where the software has actually gone. And it's bizarre because I was having a conversation with someone this morning about enterprises, and I've always worked in the enterprise space. Now, 15 years ago, open source just wasn't even considered by enterprises, or it was very, very rare in an enterprise that you would consider open source products. And
Right.
now you look at the world that we're working in today and all of the enterprises that we're dealing with, and it's like open source is definitely there in enterprises now. There is a hell of a lot of open source in enterprise. So it's just interesting how the whole world can change in 10 years, 15 years. Things are just massively changing in organizations and the way that they procure and invest in software.
Yeah. People are coming around.
Yeah. Speaking about ships and fleet, that's nice. I like that. That's a nice way to put it. Um, we will be putting out some more information on Fleet. I think it's fairly safe to say that Fleet is going to be part of Rancher 2.5.
Yep.
I'm not going to say a huge amount more right now because I don't know a huge amount more right now. It's still being developed and refined, but yeah, watch for a preview of Rancher 2.5, and hopefully it'll include Fleet sometime in the next few weeks, I guess.
Fleet is part of Basil's keynote as well. YouTube finally says I have an excellent connection again. Thank you, YouTube. Fleet's part of Basil's keynote. The keynote isn't specifically about rancher stuff, but it's about how the community needs to approach large, like, deployments of, potentially thousands of clusters. And he has a slide in there that talks about how you could end up with thousands of clusters in a manufacturing environment or something like that. And it's all around the edge. But Fleet is part of that story for managing what we're all calling cluster sprawl.
Yeah, so this is what I was saying about the sort of the unprecedented demand that we saw for K3S, and really Fleet's been born out of the back of the fact that K3S is coming out. We've started talking to people. We now understand the use cases that people want to do this stuff, use this stuff in, and then you start talking about the challenges that they will face in managing that. So that's where Fleet comes in, and it helps us sort of, again, take Kubernetes to that next level. Okay, so we can run stuff on the edge, but then how do we manage stuff at the edge? So that's what it's all about. It's really cool.
It's really cool. I feel a lot of times like this isn't a job. Like I'm fortunate to be paid to play with cutting edge technology, and yes. I mean, I wish there were more hours in the day. There's so much stuff. I have a question for you, Chris. Before K3S, I don't know why it was really hard to say. Before K3S, the documentation was about installing Rancher inside of RKE, and RKE was our Kubernetes distribution. And now K3S is out there, and they kind of have different use cases, but do you recommend that people start with RKE or start with K3S if they're looking to get started with Rancher and Kubernetes?
So I know that you were around in our 1.x days with Cattle, which was I loved Cattle. Rancher, it's what attracted me to the company, and the flexibility. So one of the things that has always been the challenge with Kubernetes is around the etcd management. So I think we had a bunch of people who didn't want to move to to Kubernetes because they didn't want to manage etcd. Right. So when we bought out K3S and the Kine in there, Kine is not etcd, which is our shim that basically fools Kubernetes into thinking that it's talking to an etcd backend, but actually it can be talking to a Postgres database or a MySQL database, which people are a lot more comfortable managing. So you get back to what we had with the Rancher 1.x was you could run a single Rancher node, and it didn't matter if you lost that node because all of the persistence and all of the information was actually stored in the database on the back end. So provided you had a backup of your database, you didn't care, your node sort of became irrelevant. And I think what K3S allows for is to get back to that model. So you can run 1, you can run 2, you can run 3, you can run 4. So you can run an odd number of Rancher servers if you want to, all connected back to that same SQL database that people are more comfortable managing than actually having to learn and back up the etcd database, and troubleshooting etcd can be a lot more problematic. So I guess it depends on where you're coming from. If you're wanting the more pure Kubernetes experience, then obviously RKE is that pure experience. But the K3S is as close to pure as you're going to get, but it just gives you options. So it gives you the flexibility that if you want to run etcd, you can. If you want to run MySQL, you can. So it's completely up to you. So I think going forward, K3S is probably slightly easier to install because it's a little bit more self-aware. RKE is just sort of following a script. But as we've just mentioned there, RKE2 is merging the best of K3S and RKE into a new sort of vision. So it's going to be partway there in 2.5, but it will continue to be enhanced to basically what Ranch has always been about, make running your container infrastructure as easy as possible.
I see that Amit is clearly lurking around on the upcoming features roadmap. He's doing his homework. That's great to see. So there are things about RKE2 that much like Rancher 2.5 are still being worked out. What's going to actually be in the final release,
including the name.
Including the name, yeah. So unfortunately, we can't talk much about that during this show. But since you clearly know where to find this information to meet, just keep your eye on those places and you'll be the first to know, or the second to know, probably, because we'll be the first to know.
Yeah, fun fact for those who watch our repos and the check-ins that happen. Darren made a check-in over the weekend, so we had a big internal meeting about RKE2 and naming on Friday. And Darren made a change that got checked in over the weekend that basically said it adds the ability to specify whatever name we want for the RKE2 binary. So just because
Nice.
we don't know what it's going to be called, but we want to be able to be flexible and not have to change lots of things. So it's, yeah. I did chuckle when I saw that one come through.
That's good. There's a difficulty in being an open source company is that we can't hide things. Like we can't have secrets because we post stuff out there to get images built. So you guys can follow along as the product develops.
Yeah. That again, that is one of the powers though that we have in that people can criticize us early, and it means we can change direction if people if we're going in the wrong direction. So it's great having that openness and that feedback loop, because really it is the community and these guys who speak to us here that help us define what the direction of the product's going to be. So these are the guys that are running the Kubernetes clusters day to day, and we're sort of we know a lot about Kubernetes, but there's people out there who probably know far more in depth what the data operations and challenges are than we do. So we draw on that experience to enhance our product to give you a better experience of running our product as well.
I was at Kubecon, and a gentleman walked up to me and was talking about where they were running Kubernetes, and they were running it on fighter jets, on F-16s. And I was like, you're running Kubernetes on F-16s? And he explained that the F-16s actually have a small computer on there with a limited amount of RAM, a limited amount of CPU, and they were looking for a Kubernetes distribution that they could fit into that wouldn't use up all the RAM and CPU. And that started my awareness of literally, like, Kubernetes is running everywhere. It's running in the craziest of places, from fighter jets to wind farms to manufacturing plants to
oil rigs, container ships.
Yep.
Yeah, it's nuts.
It's nuts.
Completely, yeah.
So if you can think of
I
it,
want K3S to be the first Kubernetes distro in space.
There was a conversation about that a few months ago. I don't remember if it was about K3S, but it was about somebody running Kubernetes on a satellite.
Yeah. We want to see if we can get K3S as the core for the next Mars rover.
That would be amazing. That would be so amazing. Oh, so if you're joining us, welcome back. We had a brief moment of technical difficulty there, but you can join the Rancher user Slack. There's an office hours channel there. Come in, chat with us. This is turning into less of a Q&A and more of just a podcast. So I think maybe in future ones, it's just going to be me and Chris and whoever else wants to join, just talking about stuff. And people can join and ask questions if they want. Because I like doing these, and we're doing them for you guys. We want to interact with you and communicate and make sure that you're getting whatever you need from us to be successful. Looking back at my bandwidth, which is actually I think it's been better. So looking back at the questions, it's still what?
Still showing stable.
Okay, good. YouTube, I have many things open in front of me here. We've got the camera, I've got a monitor that shows me the program feed, I've got lights, I've got my main computer that's actually running stuff, and over here I have an iPad Pro that's connected to the YouTube live streaming control room, and they basically give you 3 levels of approval. There's excellent, there's good, and there's poor. And it hurts me when it gives me anything but excellent. Like the way that they say that you're good, they're like, your connection's just good. And I'm like, no, I want to be excellent. Anyway, I'm getting conflicting information. It seems like we're fine. I imagine if we weren't, hey, Alan says nice podcast. There you go. See, it's a podcast. It's no longer a Q&A live stream. But join us anyway. You can interact. We should have a Discord server so people can actually speak with voice.
Maybe we should package it up and actually offer it out as a podcast, because then you're reaching that audience who only got the audio when they're out for a run. They don't need to see the video.
Somebody suggested that for my daily live stream that I'm doing, the Coffee and Cloud Native show. Um,
Yeah,
like, do you think would people actually listen to this? Is it? I guess if we're
I
just
think it's one of
podcasting and
those
talking
things.
about stuff, we're not
Yeah,
doing
I mean,
demos.
it's very similar to a lot of the podcasts that I listen to, and it's like you can do that in a lot more flexible places than if you're having to sit in front of your computer and actually try and interact with it. Whereas there's a lot of people will just be gleaning information out of this, that they're sort of passively consuming what we're talking about,
Hmm.
and you can do that in other ways. So yeah, you could just do it as an audio, create a podcast, and away you go. They can do it on their run, their cycle ride, or whatever.
Sounds like a plan. I think we're going to transform this into the Office Hours podcast, where there'll be a live stream followed by a release of a podcast that you can consume at your leisure. If that sounds like a good idea, let us know in the chat, in the Office Hours chat, or if you're watching this later, you can just post that in the comments as well, and we will
Yeah,
see.
and we want to do some of the, if we're going to do it as a podcast, you obviously need to have one of those funny podcasts to go along with it. So these are the things that happen behind the scenes, and you can do that, and it would just keep people entertained, show
Yeah.
people that we're human. We're not perfect.
No, no, we're definitely not perfect. Nowhere close. Scrolling through the prepared questions again, looking for something that we can answer. Um, Somebody asked a question: does Rancher automatically back up its own state anywhere? If you install Rancher into an, well, because that's interesting. Does Rancher back up its own state? If Rancher is installed into an RKE cluster, RKE is doing the backups, not actually Rancher, or can Rancher take control of that?
No, RKE does the backups in that instance.
But Rancher deployed Kubernetes clusters, Rancher sets up for
Correct.
Rancher deployed RKE clusters, Rancher sets up the backup of that as well. Okay. So to explain what,
And
what
I'm,
we just
I'm not.
clarified, oh,
Yeah, I
go
was
ahead.
just going to say I'm not going to spoil some of the stuff that's coming in 2.5, but we're slightly changing that to make us more flexible in where we run. So there's some cool new stuff coming there.
That's exciting. Well, for today, I used to when I had my company when I was first starting out. I told my two employees that the way that we do things today is the best way that they can possibly be done, and the way that we're going to do them tomorrow will be better. Uh, so for today, you have two options. If you're installing Rancher into an RKE cluster, then you set up RKE first, and as part of that, you set up the etcd snapshots, which you can write either to local disk or out to an S3 compatible endpoint. And then RKE manages that, and Rancher's installed into it. The reason for that is when you install Rancher into an RKE cluster, it's inside of Kubernetes, and so it doesn't have access to control the etcd bits outside. Versus when you deploy an RKE cluster with Rancher, Rancher deploys the host and then SSHs into it and then installs RKE. And so Rancher has access to the host and Kubernetes from the outside and therefore can manipulate etcd. So an RKE cluster deployed by Rancher also has etcd backups because it's RKE, but you can manage those from within Rancher. You can do one-off snapshots, you can set your recurring schedule, and you can control all of that without having to go out and deal directly with RKE. But one of the
Then
questions that I have,
don't
hmm?
forget that curveball that K3S then throws in, because if you're then using your external database, you then have to take snapshots of your external database, and that's up to you to back up the Rancher persistence effectively.
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, when deploying K3S in HA and using an external data store, that's on you. You set that up, you manage it. You can use something, you can do master master, you can use Percona extra DB backup if you're running MySQL, but that's on you. Just don't forget to do it. And then what about K3S as just a standalone using SQLite? Do they need to dump that? Can they just like stop K3S and then like you can't take backups of
Yeah, so
SQLite while it's running? What's our recommendation for how to do that?
I'm not sure. So I think what you can do is I think you can actually stop the K. So by default, the way that the K3S install sets itself up is it maps out a folder for the storage of the SQL store effectively. So if you stop the K3S service, you effectively can mount the SQL data store and take snapshots of it that way. I don't know if there is a live capability to do a snapshot of those databases. There may be. I've not tried it. I'll be honest.
Yeah, I haven't either. It's in my list of things to make a YouTube video about is go and figure out what's the best way to make a backup of K3s and then, you know, establish that as a
Yeah.
practice because I'm in the middle of rebuilding my entire home cluster to go from an old RKE Rancher deployment where I did what you're not supposed to do and I installed Rancher into RKE and then I also used it for all of my workloads, so it's all like tangled together and I can't disentangle it. So I just am rebuilding a whole new one from scratch and I haven't yet gotten to the backup components of that. But
You'll,
it's a
you'll be
question that I have.
wanting to reference our updated best practices guidance that we're working on at the moment, where you don't want to run your applications on top of your RKE cluster that's running your Rancher management server. And here are the reasons why.
Yep. Yeah, you don't want to do that. At the time, though, since it's my house, I didn't have enough infrastructure to run a Rancher cluster uh, and an RKE cluster, but K3s makes that possible because K3s has such a small footprint that I'm now running a standalone K3s box just as Rancher, and then I have a
Yeah.
3-node K3s cluster for the workloads itself.
Yeah. So you're going to externalize the database in that instance then and put that somewhere else, or are you just going to run with the local SQL database?
The Rancher server is running just with the local SQLite database, and that's fine.
Okay.
The production cluster, I used to refer to my DigitalOcean cluster as production and my home cluster as a home cluster, but the home cluster actually runs production workloads for the house. Like it manages the solar controllers and the whole inverter management system for my 40-panel solar array and the batteries. Like it's production. So in the first video that I made, I went with DQ Lite, and I was like, oh, it's experimental, but how experimental can it be? Ooh, it's super experimental. Um,
So
I built this
experimental,
whole
we're
thing.
moving away.
Yeah, I built this whole thing, not realizing that a month earlier, Darren had merged in a change that said, yeah, we're not going to use DQ Lite anymore. We're going to figure out how to do an embedded etcd instead. There's a weird problem that happens with DQ Lite where something about the masterness of it doesn't work properly. And if one of the nodes is a master and the other node never came up as a master, and you restart K3s on the one master node, it seg faults. And it gives no information about why. It just never comes up again. So I had this beautiful, gone. Nothing. So I rebuilt it. And now I've rebuilt it with an external MySQL database because, I don't want to push my luck.
Yeah, so going completely off topic and still staying with K3s, but going completely off topic here. So I run a lot of Raspberry Pis around the house for streaming TV. So I send all of my TV from the external aerial over IP, and I use OpenELEC. And what I would love is for someone to write a K3s plugin for OpenELEC. Now that would be really cool, because it's one of those read-only operating systems, so you can't install it easily. I did get it working, but it was a bit of a nightmare. So I need to get my head around it one of these days and actually try and figure out how we can put K3s in there, because to have that, like with Kodi and everything else, where you just have a one-click install of K3s and you've got a cluster up and running, because they've got other container technologies in there, K3s should be there.
Yeah. Nice. How many Pis do you have around running all of this?
I've got I've got 3 Pis and then 4 Rokus. So the Rokus aren't running K3s, obviously, but
right.
the Pis are. And sorry, I've got 4 Pis because I actually run TV head end on a Pi as well. So yeah, we completely digressed away from anything to do with Rancher.
Nobody's asking any questions. It's our show now. We can talk about whatever we want. Cloud native, Raspberry Pis, Kubernetes. All right, Nunix has a question. Nunix says, perfect story about the home lab. What would be the lessons learned that could actually be applied in a daily job if we were in the Kubernetes learning process? Oh, that's interesting. Definitely don't run experimental stuff. Do testing first. The way that DQ Lite failed was unexpected. I just expected it to work as well. I mean, it's not anything bad about DQ Lite. It's how K3s was using DQ Lite. We're kind of pushing the limits of the way that it was supposed to be used, and that didn't work. Definitely don't put anything into production, even in a pseudo production state. And production in this case, I'd moved a couple of workloads over to it. Plex. I mean, how production is Plex. My
Yeah.
Unify controller for actually Plex is pretty production in this house.
Yeah,
um,
I was going to say the disruption that it causes the house, it's more disruption than I've ever got in any enterprise when a system's gone down. If they can't watch
yes,
TV, oh, the world has ended.
yeah,
It's yeah,
it's
everything's a
so.
7-1.
um, I actually, a couple years ago, I created a ticketing system for the house so that when my wife had problems, she could submit tickets, and I would like prioritize them. It failed. Did no, so that's gone. Um, she just she
That's
just
going
comes in
too
and she's
far.
like, she will have a technology problem with her computer, and computers just mess with her. Like they know that she doesn't know, so they do things. They're like bad children. But then I come in the room and I say, "Can you just show me the problem?" And the problem is gone. Just my presence is enough to
Yeah,
put the computer back in order.
yeah.
So yeah, so no ticketing system. Back to the things that you could learn. Just make sure that you're not putting production stuff on it unless you have a backup or an actual rollback plan of some kind. In my case, my rollback plan was I rolled back to the cluster I was migrating from. But if that was gone and I didn't have a backup, I would have had to rebuild all of that stuff from scratch. Uh,
Do you
Otherwise, it
even
makes
run
it.
Longhorn at home?
Uh, I I don't. I have two Synology NASs, one that runs NFS and iSCSI, and the one that is just
Yeah.
dedicated to iSCSI with a huge cache volume. So everything runs off of that.
Yes, I know there's a few people. Obviously, we sort of watch a lot of what goes off in the forums and stuff. And there are a few people out there who are running Longhorn at home for sort of home labs as well. So again, that's another way of sort of protecting yourself against the failure scenarios of some of the data loss. But I think that the key thing that we've seen at the moment is the fact that there isn't a Pi for Longhorn. So
Mm,
a lot of the clusters that we're seeing people running in their homes are along the similar lines of what Sheldon's got, where they've got a group of Raspberry Pis and they're following Alex's stuff with open files and sort
yep.
of creating K3S clusters. And yeah, trying to get that Longhorn on there is something I think we're working on. We just need to get it compiled in the right way. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see what the performance would be on that. So,
Yeah.
I mean, especially now you can boot from an external USB on the Pi 4s, which is what I do, to an external SSD. So you don't have the bottleneck that you have with the integrated micro SD cards as well.
And SD card exhaustion. I started out on Pies and
Yeah.
I burned through SD cards that suddenly the thing doesn't work. And you're like, what the heck happened? All right, we're at the
Yeah.
top of the hour, so we have to wrap this up. Before I do the outro, do you have any closing comments, Chris?
No, just thank you very much for having me on. It was great. Really enjoyed it.
All right, so I will wrap this up. Thank you all for coming. I apologize for the technical difficulties, but it's the internet, and what are you going to do? Thank you for staying through the technical difficulties, and just thank you for joining us. This was great. We learned a lot about the program, so I think we're going to change this. Those of you who joined the Office Hours chat, thank you for your questions and participating. My thanks to Chris Irwin for joining, because this would have been a lot more boring if it was just me with like hand puppets or something. The Office Hours channel is always open in the Rancher user Slack. There's also the general channel. There's the Academy channel. There's lots of channels. There's about 20,000 people registered. There's thousands of people online at any given point in time. So if you have questions and we're not doing a live stream, go there and ask. Uh, we're we're gonna do this every month. There's another one this afternoon. Join the meetup this afternoon if you want to see a preview of some of the new cool stuff that's coming in Rancher 2.5. And since I'm now a minute over time, I will just say thank you, thank you, thank you, and we will see you next time. Until then, stay safe.